Hey there, welcome to episode 96 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 3 p.m. Pacific Time, Thursday, September 25, 2025. We normally publish on Thursdays. Normally this would already have been done. It's a conspiracy, I tell you. No, I've trying to get my voice to be more normal, but we're going to have to go with what we got. Otherwise, we'll be recording this tomorrow. Open analysis in action. An open analysis in action. Today's title and topic for the FFS Talk audio program. If you have never heard of this program before, if this is your first time, FFS Talk is intended to be a conversation, a discussion, an argument, some sort of comparative notion sharing where we talk about what works, what does not, and what we might do about it on a particular topic or maybe even topics, who knows. We have yet to have a guest. I have to be honest, I haven't really been trying to find guests. Vegas is a creepy place when it comes to that. Hey, do you want to be a guest? Hello. It's hard to find people who will follow through and so on. So the quest continues. In the meantime, I like to think of this as establishing a field of seeds planted for various topics of discussion. So at any given time, anyone could go flip through 96 episodes of the FFS Talk audio program and find a title and topic. Usually they're pretty close. And give it a listen and say, I don't want to let that sit. I want to express my views, my opinions. I want to counter with my own take, etc. So that could happen anytime. So there you go. I also like to think of these as receipts. At any given time, you can listen in on at least my view of whatever the particular topic is. And that might even change. It might change over time, and you can hear the earlier and the later and so on. So yeah, this comes in handy in general, but and as part of some of the other things I am working on currently. But at some point we'll have guests and so on. So that's FFS Talk in a nutshell. If you are not familiar with what the 3-word abbreviation FFS stands for, I'll give you a hint. It is probably something you've heard an Irish person say. You'll see the FFS abbreviation now and then. If you don't know what it is now, you need to hang out with more Irish people, clearly. Episode 96 on this September 25, 2025. Now it's 3:03 p.m. I will say right up front, I truncate the silence to try to cut down on quiet periods. So whatever the time is when I'm done, and I sometimes say what time it is or what the timer is saying, what the elapsed time is as I'm recording. But do know that I do truncate the silence so that it tightens it up a little bit. You may even hear some little artifacts if it trims a bit too closely. But I do that so that there's not as much dead air. So there you go. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, and there are hopefully more places now and into the future, or from where you're listening in the past, where you can find this audio program, there should be an episode description of some sort, and in there you'll find the show notes, which includes a summary, which is it one big, there's two, one longer and one short sentence. So I'll read those real quick. And then the links for today's episode. And if you have heard previous episodes, you know that I used to list off at least 4 shameless self-promotion links. We're cutting it down to 2 with the understanding that you should click on them, at least one of them at some point, and you'll find the things that were linked to otherwise, and so on and so on. So there's 2 links, shameless self-promotion, and 1 link for today's episode that's generally relevant, although it's really more of an interesting fact. Anyway, let's get started so we can get finished on this lovely, lovely Thursday afternoon here in Vegas or wherever you are. The summary of today's episode is: as this episode is recorded, one of the news items of the day, every day, concerns a crime committed in public with multiple video angles, multiple witnesses, a suspect, and a variety of statements and silence from all corners, government and otherwise. Maybe history does rhyme. That could be just about anything. Contemporaneously, you probably know that I'm referring to the events in Utah, but I could also be referring to school shootings or other tragic events, tragic crime events. People often will call things tragedies. I think floods due to a storm could be labeled a tragedy. I think killing people with a gun that's a crime. Not a tragedy. Anyway, enough editorializing. Let's get started with the links. FFS Talk has a homepage, ffstalk.com. FFS. It looks like FF Stock, but it's ffstalk.com, no spaces. There you will find at least a link to the Spotify, I think the latest Spotify episode. That could change, but there's an embedded player. Making my own player is probably on the agenda. Links to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@FFS Talk. There's a audio podcast on Apple. I'd say audio because nowadays videos are also podcasts, kind of either way. So Apple Podcast, Amazon Podcast, Spotify, obviously, maybe iHeartRadio. I can't remember if this one's on there. That should be. I mean, eventually, I'm trying to spread the love across more platforms. There's also an RSS feed. You can find that right now. You can find that on the Spotify profile for this channel, which is also linked there. But as I get more of this all sorted out, I do produce 4 normal audio programs and a 5th one that is not scheduled, so it can be whenever. And then the Monday Buy Me an Update program, which is 5 minutes, but that is a whole nother thing to publish. So cut me some slack. Anyway, the FFS Talk homepage has links to those things, as does the profile page linking everything, formerly known as the Buy Dan a Coffee profile at buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. You can still visit there anytime you like. I've had that profile page there for 5 years, maybe. It is basically the go-to place with the links if everything else is down or broken or goes away. The buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page has been there the whole time. And I do add links. So there are links to all the YouTube channels, the home pages, the Spotify profile pages for this program, FFS Talk, for Quaggling Sand, for Innovate for Vegas, Let's Innovate for Vegas, for Cafe Genius Impresarios, for Buy Me an Update, and Coffee Solo. Where do I get all this free time? That's why my voice is all messed up all the time. And the third link, the third of 3, Sensor Fusion. It's a Wikipedia page. Sensor Fusion, like, melting things together. FUSION, sensor fusion. It's putting different sensor inputs together to form a more nuanced, a more complex, more complicated, really, view of the world, whatever the sensor data is. We'll get into that briefly. Sensor fusion is becoming more and more a thing in daily life, for better or worse. So, this is not a conspiracy theory episode, by the way, although conspiracy theories do play into this. Open analysis in action is generally the people of the world, taking it upon themselves to investigate, to learn, to investigate, and to analyze, and to come up with theories, you know what they're called, and maybe even some conclusions that can later be disproven or made a part of some other conclusion, etc. So we're going to talk about what that actually entails to some degree. Now, I do not participate in crowd theory building in general. I'm a spectator most of the time, as far as I can tell. So I don't have hands-on experience. But if you've ever done collaborative development of anything, so a collaborative development effort of a design, of a drawing, of a theory, of a software project, of course, I've done that several times. It's not too dissimilar. Some of the challenges, anyway. The motivations might be different, but that's what we'll talk about today. So let's avoid the rabbit hole. The rabbit hole. I just heard an expression the other day that the smartest rabbits have 3 holes: an entrance, an exit, and an emergency exit, I guess, a third exit, a second exit. Third exit? I guess they're all exits, really. If Dimitri Martin is to be believed, a door-marked entrance only is severely underutilized. Avoiding the rabbit hole. First of all, I did not include a bunch of links to the current Charlie Kirk assassination and the current legal process with the primary suspect in custody. That's Tyler Robinson. Because there would be too much to flip through to determine what today is relevant for me to figure out what I wanted to post links to, and that could change tomorrow. Whenever you listen to this episode or re-listen, the state of affairs will be what it is at that time. Probably very different from what it is today. So search in situ, contemporaneously. Search when you are curious, and things will probably have changed, or there will be more things to search through. More generally, this is not an episode about the assassination event and surrounding investigation and legal proceedings taking place now, nor is it about the JFK assassination in 1963, nor any other controversial and conspiracy theory driving event in particular, but the general idea of crowdsourcing investigation and analysis. That would be many more links, to say the least, if I was going to try to be all inclusive. Although at some point some methodologies it might make sense to come up with some tools or some ideas, and that's what we'll get to at the end of this episode as usual. Thus, while I'm going to refer to specific incidents in this episode more towards the end, but a little bit here and there, this is still about what works and what does not work. Apparently, I'm sure everybody would be open to some opinion. Maybe this is a conspiracy in itself, or appears to not work anyway. When it comes to citizen journalists and investigators and analysts, analysts, analysis, and analyze. Okay, we got it. This episode is about this process, if there is one, and not the specific incidents, which I'm using as examples. So the inciting incident, if you've ever watched a movie, or probably more relevant, the critique of movies by those who make movies or who are highly opinionated about movies. The inciting incident, that's the reason the movie is produced. But in this case, it's the reason to kick off citizen-driven analysis, investigation analysis, and so on. So as always, something happens that gets all of the attention. It's gunfire has a way of doing that sometimes, and rightfully so. The JFK assassination, which usually needs no more description, and the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk share a few similarities among the many differences. The series of events on 9/11, events around what has now come to be known as J6, and that one I'm not really going to talk about, but there's always a video, and there's always an account, and there's usually many of both. And they usually converge, but you have to take the time to tease through a lot of things. This is true of all these and many more. Something happens, and there's at least some media that captures it at or near the actual incident, and the timeline begins. And that's not really true. I'm saying that now. Well, we can say that the observation or the awareness of the timeline begins, but for most people, the clock starts ticking when whatever it is happens. And then later it becomes apparent that that's not really strictly true, but we shall see. Now, there's a reason the JFK assassination on November 22nd, 1963 is so well known. It is the presence of that citizen journalism in the form of video captured on a personal video camera, Abraham Zapruder, the most famous, but there were a couple of other ones. Something we do not see much of at all prior. Much of. Cameras were not brand new, but they were relatively new, video especially, for normal, casual civilian use. As some may recall, the televised presidential debate between JFK and Richard Nixon is rather infamous for the fact that it was televised. It was the first televised presidential debate. With some debate, concerning which of the two won the debate, who came out ahead, depending on whether one watched the television debate, televised I should say, or listened on a radio to the audio-only version. So fun fact, those who watched on television found JFK more telegenic. He was more poised. He looked better on TV. He seemed to perform better by watching and listening to him. Those who listened on the radio or heard only the audio didn't see the sweaty lip or the nervous look, the discomfort with being on television found in Richard Nixon, and he was usually deemed the winner. Of course, the election was the outcome. There was video prior, not a video prior. Cameras were used to capture events during World War II, for example. But for a normal person to have a serviceable video camera in their possession and in use at a noteworthy event was not at all common. And obviously the number of devices capturing media in high definition with reasonable audio and GPS time and location data available is orders of magnitude greater today, making the likelihood of capturing the inciting incident from more than one angle substantially greater today. Also, fun fact, Abraham Zabruta, I think it's Zabruta. If you hear him say his own name, it's Zabruta, something like that. Sorry, family of. He almost didn't bring the camera. I don't know if he was going to leave it at home or he was going to leave it in the office of his dress shop, I think it was. So, who knew? Who knew? Of course, if you have a conspiracy theory gap that you need to fill, maybe he already knew ahead of time to stand in a good spot. Anyway, who knows? Could be. I don't know if they ever investigated that. Probably, but who knows? So there's immediate divergence, and this was true. Well, this has been true. There's nothing new. When you have cameras and whatnot, that's fine. But if you have people, everybody has a different viewpoint. The famous elephant example. It may be that some really consequential events take place with 0 witnesses, more likely with 1 or 2 witnesses, and they may keep the secrets and nobody will ever know. That's not what we're talking about today. In the real world, especially with a spectacle like the public assassination of a well-known person, every single witness, whether with eyes, ears, video, or still camera, whatever the individual scenario, becomes the beginning of a personal narrative, sort of a personal view of the timeline. Focused and motion stable video with clear audio beginning prior to the actual incident and capturing continuously for as long as possible would be nearly ideal, but it is exceedingly rare. So usually you end up with nowadays you end up with multiple camera angles, multiple levels of quality, shaking of the camera, people running, so they'll either drop it or they'll, it's no longer pointing at the back, like, oh, if only 1 more second, we would have been able to see what was going on. There are now more mounted security cameras. There are traffic cameras now that are much more prevalent. Door cameras obviously have become a big thing. And now law enforcement usually has access to these fixed cameras, depending on which service is providing the cloud data storage for the camera, the captured video streams and whatnot. Anyway, all that, those are all variables, but for the most part, there's a lot more video happening. And so there's a greater chance in modern times that there will be at least one, and usually many more than one, video sources to take a look at. But there will also always be eyewitnesses, and usually those accounts will diverge. The moment an incident or the inciting incident occurs, each individual becomes what we could call a sensor, capturing all sorts of data around them with some different initial viewpoint. Some may be looking directly at, some are looking behind or in front of or around, or they turned around at them, at the right moment. They heard a crack or some other noise and they looked in a direction they thought, there's all variations, different assumptions, often different levels of panic and thus a lack of clarity, or a variable level of clarity, and so on. Recollection of detail and order of events may become clouded. Which happened first? Can't be really sure. And there is always the possibility, even likelihood, that gathering the data from this population of individuals can be a real challenge. Just tracking down who was really there, who claims to have been there, what do they remember. Sometimes there will be discussion which can add some shade where there was no color, so to speak, right? Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. I talked about this with my friend who was also there, and now we've had some effect on both of our individual respective perceptions and memory of what happened or what we think happened. Actual sensors are easier data sources to work with, obviously, so more cameras should make life easier, but the process is actually similar. You have to find the data. Was this camera recording data? Yeah, but it resets every 23 hours and 59 minutes, and then yeah. So can we get the video? Can we, is it unedited? Is it unaltered? Does it have a clear shot? Is the lighting sufficient? Is it capturing at full frame rate? Well, to save space, we only capture 10 frames per second. Okay. So there's all kinds of caveats when you have this sensor input. So it's not a slam dunk when your sensor, if you have 1,000 cameras pointed at something, some fraction of those will be wrong. Sometimes they'll be not exactly pointed at the right place. They'll be dead. They'll be not functioning. Their storage will fail. So you can't count on all that stuff. So generally speaking, capturing as much data as possible, whether it's from humans or cameras or microphones. Microphone on a motorcycle? Sure. Starting off with as much raw data as possible is usually a good mental frame of mind, a good attitude to have. I have used the term sensor so that you may look further into what is called sensor fusion. See the links. And when you think about it, a video camera, or now a cell phone camera, providing a video record of the incident is similar to, in one way, to an eyewitness account, but with better and more detailed recollection, of course, usually. There will be more eyewitnesses than cameras, making the eyewitness important sensors, but we have to account for error. So if 1,000 people see something, you'll probably get a more divergent set of results, a wider response sample, like bins of, like, oh, was he wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt? Yes. So people's recollections will vary more, but you will have much more data. The likelihood that every single person has their camera out is low. I'm assuming that's usually not 100%. Usually, just based on the Charlie Kirk incident, which was on September 10th. Today's the 25th, so 2 weeks ago. There have been, I think, as far as trained on the tent where the inciting incident took place, so you know what happened. I think there's been 4 good video, like usable video feeds. Did more than 4 people have their cameras out? Probably. Were they taking pictures of other things? Maybe. I've only seen 1 or 2 rooftop shots. I've seen there are security cameras from, there's all kinds of cameras in different places. So you're going to get different types of data at different times from different locations, pointing in different directions. Hey, that camera would have been perfect, except the sun was shining off of whatever, and it obscured the view. Anything's possible. So again, more data is usually better, as long as you can fuse that data. Fuse, not confuse. So if you can account for the error, and you can combine eyewitness accounts with the actual video footage, and footage is a throwback term like podcasts, so you know what I mean. If you have lots and lots and lots of moving frame data, and you can actually connect that with individual eyewitness accounts, with audio evidence, with time of day, so you can figure out where the shadows are pointing and so on, all this stuff comes together eventually. So what about the timeline? Once there is an incident or inciting incident, and the timeline is moving forward with the heightened attention paid to who was running, which car was parked where, stumbling upon a weapon or a bullet shell casing, or evidence of thermite use, or conversations overheard, or whatever the case. And all of these come with viewpoints and perceptions by the person who found or overheard or whatever it is. They're likely misconceptions, or because they've only seen a fraction of the big picture. They're not malicious misconceptions, but they don't know the other half of that story. They don't know the other half of that conversation, et cetera, all in hopes of building up a complete picture to determine what that picture is, to determine who is responsible, so that arrest might be made and justice pursued, aftermath and impact on life and surroundings of the people near and far, and the country maybe, and global, this and that. So sometimes inciting incidents can have far-reaching, probably farther and further than intended initially, but maybe not. Maybe disrupting the universe was in the plan. So things can get kind of chaotic. Just as important, reconstructing the timeline prior to the inciting incident, which is the really interesting part, I think. Obviously, at the time, the contemporaneous, the few seconds immediately prior and immediately after, those are critical. But how did we get here? So the prior to the inciting incident, which ultimately connects the perpetrators to the event, establishes any conspiracy or conspiracies, provides motive in some cases. And when you have a conspiracy, of course, you have multiple perpetrators. And at the very least, fills in the story. Everybody likes to know the whole story. If you've ever watched a modern day movie review or commentary on movies, especially the so-called fandom menace, you know that it's never done correctly. And I was toying with, since the Alien Earth series, season 1 just concluded, the same day Hulu sent out their 50% price hike email. So I guess I won't be seeing season 2, not worth it. But it's interesting to see just how badly people who are professional writers, for example, just how bad they are, how badly they can misjudge the nature of a story and do so poorly at connecting a story and what sometimes it's called retconning, retroactive continuity, where you try to make something that seems to have happened make more sense by in a prequel or in a movie that comes out later. Oh, this is why that happened, and you try to make it more clear. You might try to fix something that doesn't make sense, and so on. Boy, does that start happening in the real world with some of these. Well, I mean, that's where conspiracy theories start springing up because things don't make sense. And why do they not make sense? Let's get into it, and that's what happens, right? Or just in general. I mean, now it's almost reflex, which is probably okay. I don't think that's a problem, but we'll see. The why might come from knowing the timeline before. Like, how did we get to this gunshot? How did we get to this plane flying into a building? How did we get here? A, we can figure out how to not get here next time, or B, we can determine motive, and we can often from that determine what the real scope of the conspiracy, if there is one, or what the motivation was with potential outcomes, what might happen years from now based on the planning that went into it and what the intended outcome was, and so on and so on. So there's a lot that can be learned and understood by knowing the timeline. As I'm recording this today, I'm just in the very beginning. I think I'm on the third or fourth chapter of a book about the history of the development of atomic weapons. And so the author has started out by looking at the life and times of some of the scientists who would eventually move to Los Alamos with various circuitous routes. So there's Bohr and what's his name? Uncertainty principle. And Oppenheimer and the uncertainty principle. What's his name? This is so dumb. Heisenberg. Thank you. I didn't even look it up. Heisenberg. Yes, if you're, let's not go too far off topic. Anyway, so it's interesting because the author is starting with, these research scientists, these physicists and other professions, scientists, what motivated them, what decided to make them take the step to move to America, to escape Germany or to escape Europe, to move to America, to be involved in this program. Was it Niels Bohr? I think it was. And he was an important player. Enrico Fermi, when he wasn't thinking about aliens. There were so many characters that became household names. They were already well known and understood. Einstein played his role, but not in America. Not at Los Alamos. He was at Princeton, I think, at the time, right? So knowing the backstory, knowing the history is important. It's what makes the world go round. So it is important to know that timeline into the past that brings any confluence of events to the inciting incident. But an interesting thing to ponder, this is maybe a little bit philosophical, every moment that passes after the inciting incident places more incident-related information on that timeline in the past. That is, if the inciting incident is, we can call it at time zero, then there is everything that happened before, of course, so T minus 1 second, et cetera, and everything after, right? The shooter ran across the roof, or he ran down to the first floor and exited, or he got a Coke, or whatever the case. However, from an investigative standpoint, everything has happened before now. The investigator can only talk to a witness at this moment, and that witness witnessed the experience at, T minus 10 seconds to T plus 100 seconds, and they were running. But now a day or 5 days has passed, so everything is in the past. At any time a question is asked, a photo is viewed, a video is stepped through, it is from a past time frame. As we might surmise, the more time that passes from time zero, the less likely clear recollections. A complete video, nowadays that's less likely, but sometimes videos would decay or become deleted or corrupted in some way. That's still a possibility. Saved information will be accessible and available to the investigation. Hopefully more of it, but sometimes less will be available. Accessible as in, can you even reach it? Is it being hidden away? Is it being has it been destroyed in some way? And then available, Are you allowed to use it? Is it in a place where you can find it, et cetera, et cetera? Time is usually of the essence, as is so often the case. So crowd wisdom, maybe. I don't know about this crowd thing every once in a while. I think I've done a whole episode on this. In fact, at least one. Every person on the timeline before and during the inciting incident, of course, may remain involved in some way, from responding to investigator queries to providing material evidence and so on, or they may join what has become more common, even more common, a population of curious individuals of varying degrees of credibility and credulity who take it upon themselves to find out what really happened, really, in quotes perhaps. And then there are the spectators like me. I will say I did read Jim Marrs, I think, one of the books that was the basis of the JFK movie from Oliver Stone. I can't remember the name of the title of the book. And I've watched many documentaries and I've seen interviews, and it's very interesting. But it's, of course, I mean, it's an industry that has taken on a life of its own, and some of the theories posited have been ridiculous. They conflict with each other. So that's some of what I'm thinking today is like, there should be a system that would save people time at the very least, but also make for a more clear picture for the spectators or for people thinking about joining in the investigation. And I'm seeing that right now, which is interesting, which is also something I'll touch on a little bit, I think. Sometimes more attention is better. When it comes to finding a missing person, for example, or a person of interest, having more people keeping an eye out, so to speak, is often a good thing. Do you know this person? Have you seen this person? Did you see this person on the bus with you or on the plane or at the mall? Did you see this person grabbing this other person, etc.? There is always a high percentage of false hits, of course, when someone looks just like the person of interest. They were spotted, but no, that isn't the person. But generally speaking, having a crowd looking is like having many fuzzy cameras scanning the environment. It's not perfect, but more sensors are good, usually. This is where I think in the first couple, once the FBI published the initial pictures from a stairwell, I think it was, and that's of course subject to debate. So we'll just say that they said they did that, and they said that those pictures came from a stairwell, whatever the case was. They said, I think the number was 7,000. We received 7,000 tips. That's a lot of tips. Not all of them will be useful. Not all of them will be relevant. This is often why some details are withheld, so that the person providing the tip can provide the missing piece, the little extra detail that wasn't in the photo, the detail that was maybe altered. If someone provides a tip and it is essentially, I saw the photo and I'm going to describe it to you, that's not a valid tip, right? So some sort of base filtering mechanism has to be in place. But in general, when you're getting eyewitness accounts and witnesses in general to call in with tips, you're going to get a lot of noise. That's just been shown over forever. We certainly have substantially more tools available, though. Nearly infinite connectivity, not only between this cadre of investigators, that people want to take their time and dive into this stuff. Usually they're amateurs, but sometimes they're professionals with different skill sets and backgrounds and so on. But different cadre of investigators and analysts and people just curious but motivated enough to really dive in seriously. But also between each of them, so they can actually share information and progress, and who's gonna, I'll take this part, and they could actually share the load. But I don't know how often that really happens. That's TBD. So that they might use the tools to share real data, deriving useful information and collaboratively constructing actual theories. You could still call these conspiracy theories, but with the peer review process maybe in place, that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Like, what if somebody toiled through making a YouTube video, they actually talked to a ballistics expert or or someone else who was looking at the same exact things and saying, I see something completely different. Nah, let me spend an hour creating, or 2 hours or more, producing a video for YouTube. I'll monetize the hits and I'll maybe spread a theory that is ultimately debunked, but I'll at least have another video floating out there that I will never delete with incorrect information in it. That seems totally reasonable, right? but it is collaboration built into the citizen journalism environment. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Is collaboration built in, though? I suspect not. There's not like adversarial debauchery going on, but I've literally witnessed, oh yeah, a lot of you were sending me a link to this other video, or hey, a guy I know, or I know that person and they've made this other video and I'm gonna respond to it. And it's not really a reaction video so much, but a response where I'll debunk some of the things. I agree with two things. Why not do that beforehand? That's sort of what we're talking about today. So what works, though? What works in this whole scheme of open analytics, open analysis, I should say? Analytics is a different sort of thing, but open analysis of the inciting incident and the things that happened before, leading up to it, and after, and since, and what's being covered up, what really happened. Access to information and to collaboration with others with similar interest and dedication has never been greater. Now, this may not necessarily include access to authoritative information. Sometimes that's being withheld, covered up for whatever reason. And it's a controversy that does not seem to be fading in the slightest for decades, hundreds, thousands of years, who knows? There's always palace intrigue and other such things to contend with. But I suspect this is part of what energizes the efforts for decades, certainly, and the formation of conspiracy theories thus. One could say since November 1963, though I would argue that this is true prior, but with far less contemporaneous visibility, that people are generally interested, fascinated, maybe obsessed with getting to the bottom of some particular event, the whys and wherefores, the real truth. Real truth. Is that trademarked? Sometimes there is a more nuanced agenda to affix blame, for example, especially in a politically divided environment. But in general, the desire to know and motivation to pursue that desire to know are only more enabled in our modern times, especially if people are bored. They're tired of TikToks going, or they want to be on TikTok. Making findings public from a variety of viewpoints, experience levels, depth of analysis, and maybe even other factors, actual professional experience. I'm a retired forensic surgeon. I'm a retired detective. I am a detective doing this as a side hobby. Fill in the blank. It could be anybody with actual experience or aspirational. Maybe it's somebody who just became a detective or forensic surgeon or whatever the case may be. These can aid the publishing of these viewpoints can aid the general public understanding the events around the incident and the incident itself, with the caveat that sometimes artificial amplification of more popular theories may outweigh more plausible, even more correct theories, and this is always a problem. However, if findings are visible for all to see, time and thoughtful consideration may win out, or maybe congressional hearings will kick off to examine the topic again. Congress did that twice. The House Select Committee on Assassinations and what was the other one? Anyway, left to the listener. But yeah, there was one sometime after it was in the 70s. Was it after 75? Okay, let's look. House Select Committee on Assassinations. Nope, not even close. If I could type, Committee on Assassinations was in 1976, right? So this is Zabruta. Geraldo played the Zabruta film in 1975 that almost certainly caused an uproar, a lot less confidence in the Warren Report. So House Select Committee on Assassinations, and then the second one, which was after the JFK movie, which was House hearings after JFK movie. The 2020, what? That's not right. That was the declassification of documents. 76 to 78, HSC conclusions. Wasn't there another one? There was another hearing after. Oh, the Records Collection Act of 1992. Okay, so that was after the 1991 film of JFK. So that the House tried to go through and get records, and they were supposed to be published eventually. And to this day, there's some debate about what still remains redacted and whatnot. Protecting somebody from something. So what is not working? And that's the crux of today's episode. This is where we can look at a few examples, which I encourage you to delve into if you are interested enough. In fact, if you are interested enough, you likely already know the examples here, so I can be somewhat vague because I really don't want to dive into these too much. I've kind of intermingled a few things just to whet the appetite and to avoid leaning one way or the other on any case, although surely my descriptions will be somewhat editorialized. So here are some examples of notions that rise to prominence when citizen journalists, investigators, analysts, and others who might be not experts. Often some answer is found eventually, but more often the question lingers and forms some part of some other theory, and they kind of stack one upon the other for better or worse. Mauser rifles figure into incidents now and then, sometimes as a distraction, but they are often photographed in situ. Then they, it wasn't it was a Mannlicher Carcano. I think sometimes pronounced Mannlicher Carcano, and I think it's really just a Carcano rifle. So Mauser figures into a lot of things. I don't own a Mauser, but I guess I should. I don't know, just in case. The ability to handle and fire weapons is often called into question. Could they have made the shot? Often with no clear resolution. How were they on that day with that weapon in those circumstances? Well, they probably, whoever it was, probably did okay from some perspective. Scientific findings sometimes fly in the face of what is seen on video or multiple videos without a clear understanding of the provenance of the videos, nor sometimes the provenance of the scientific findings. So if they conflict, according to this video, well, that video is only 3 seconds and the incident was taking place over the course of 25 seconds or whatever, right? How much do I understand? How much information do I really have? Where did it come from? The heat required to melt steel is one thing. When you think melting steel, you think steel becoming liquid and dribbling down the side of a wall, perhaps, or melting the wall. The heat required to alter the load-bearing strength of steel is another thing. And that was a point of contention for a long time. Was it a plane that struck the Pentagon? The photos in single video frame may be misleading. Are they a picture of the hole in the side of the building, or are they a picture of the entire landscape surrounding the building with airplane parts spread all over? Was someone eating an infected bat? The flying mammal, not an implement for baseball. Was there smoke on the knoll? What was with the umbrella? What was with that umbrella anyway? Nobody looked at the likely source of the shot, but there was a shot from that direction. Usually if there's a noise, people would reflexively look towards the noise, like trying to figure out what's going on. What if nobody looks? Where's the autopsy report? That seems to always be the case, right? We're not going to let it down. Well, but we have a description of what the report might say at some point. Who benefited from this? This is that motivational question. Does the timeline go far enough? Yeah, why did somebody do this? What was the motivation, and who actually benefits from this, and was that a part of the motivation? Why were people celebrating? More often is why were those people celebrating? Jumping up and down, clapping, cheering, pointing. Maybe they already had their video cameras out and pointing in the right direction the whole time. I don't know if there's ever been a case where that's actually been shown. There have been rumors, but those usually don't bear out. Was it from the front or the rear or both? Were those airplanes or missiles? What did they do with the passengers? Phones don't work at that altitude. Why were photos and videos confiscated or otherwise collected right after the incident? That one happens. That one is interesting because sometimes they're confiscated and collected. Other times nobody ever asks. So we're seeing that lately. Are we sure about that person or people identified in various interviews and their involvement? Like, were they really there? Did they really know what they're talking about? Did they just make something up so that they would get on TV so they could sell a book? How did the suspect go from point A to point B? There wasn't enough time. They weren't wearing the same clothing. Where did he get the gun? Where did he get the other gun? By the way, bullet casings always figure into these things. Why bullet casings and what their markings are on them. Sometimes they're marked for a chain of evidence that never actually gets confirmed. We need a bullet. Here's one. It's got glitter on it. It must be magic. The story coming from the government, especially regarding autopsy and other evidence, persons of interest, arrests, and all other aspects of an investigation, do not align with perceived reality, is often the case. What is up with that? And that is not a way, by the way, to squash conspiracy. And some might argue that that's desirable. There's a whole business around misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, all being handed out willy-nilly by the Project Blue Book and whoever else, so that the general public would think that that UFOs, that unidentified flying objects, which are themselves simply unidentified flying objects, that could be anything, convincing them that they were of alien origin is much more interesting than a stealth research aircraft or whatever the case may be. So what's the motivation to have this misalignment of what people think is true or what might be true versus what they're being told, what we are being told, I should say? That fuels entire industries. So the list doesn't even get close enough to the surface to scratch it. But there are so many questions on questions that can swirl around, and they are often they continue to swirl around forever after, amplified at times by those with more reach, but not necessarily more insight or perhaps more analytical sensibility. But a titillating story coming from the right person or people. Lately, it would be certain podcasters on YouTube or Spotify, whether in 1975 or 2025 or anywhere in between or before. These can fan any conspiratorial flame, theory or otherwise. The ability for people to publish their ideas, which is a good thing, by the way. I'm not arguing against freedom to express ideas by any means. But because people are so able to do it at scale, at will and at scale, and without inclination by many to push back, that is, you might watch something and say, oh, okay, that seems reasonable. Nobody's going to go, oh, now I need to create a channel so I can publish my own content to react to this thing. Unfortunately, it's almost come to that in order to rebut or debunk something. These can make the more exciting idea, the one that's titillating, the one that's, ooh, I didn't know that. Now I know the rest of the story. I can make that travel around the world while the truth is still charging its phone, if I can modernize that slightly aged expression. Maybe you're putting your boots on or your pants on. Truth, it's hard to say. So what might we do about this thing? We're coming to the end, I promise. My timer right now says 52 minutes, and it'll be shorter, as I mentioned. So what we might do, what can we do about this? Well, we covered one idea in a previous episode, or at least one strategy concerning a consistent time base. So tag everything with a UTC timestamp, that's Universal Coordinated Time, and use a consistent time source, which I wasn't totally clear about when I talked about this. Sort of implied they're using UTC, you're using correct UTC timestamps. But if everybody's basing the time not on whatever's on their watch or their clock, which may be based on cell tower time, which is based on GPS, which is based on UTC is based on the same time base. Maybe it's an atomic clock at the U.S. Naval Observatory. Maybe it's GPS, which is up in orbit somewhere, accounting for relativistic effects. So those are reasonable sources, and if we're all using the same one, that's good. While this was true with some researchers investigating the JFK assassination after 1963, this has only become more of an issue where someone publishes some finding, some new theory or video clip or eyewitness account, and assembles a new big picture, like, oh, this changes everything. And others may begin working to build upon or debunk that new fork in the timeline without sharing those efforts, simultaneously relying on this new finding and discounting it. Like some people will say, this is true, this has made my own theory plausible, and others will say, this doesn't make any sense, it cannot be true. Look, it contradicts this reality that we know to be true, etc., etc. So you end up with these opposing forces. So having a consistent time base and actually publishing data so that people know, oh, I came up with this idea before, and since then people have tried to come up with a counterexample or to try to debunk it, but it has survived these tests. It has survived a form of peer review. So a consistent timeline of the research, the analysis, the investigation and analysis that has gone into this, so that we know. And as an example, I have seen I have YouTube videos playing just for some distraction while I'm working. You'll see somebody created some content, and then the next day or 2 days later or 3 days, they say, oh, I don't know if you saw that video I made, but we had a discussion, we had a live stream, and and we discussed it, and now it turns out that that's probably not true. In the meantime, someone who saw it probably when I did 3 days ago said, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And they started on their own theory. So they start creating some narrative around that theory, which is then debunked on the other timeline. So coordinating information with a similar time base, you're like, oh, this information is 3 days old, and here's everything that's happened in a 3-day time span. You should review those things and not base your work on this far back in a timeline that's moving very quickly, or events are moving very quickly on these forks of timelines. So here's an impossible idea, but it would be a step in the right direction. Along with that consistent time base, establish an origin. This would be controversial. So having one origin. The open source software world, so I'm kind of in that world, has evolved to the point where tools like the infamous Git, there have been others, but Git does an interesting job, and it's certainly free, which is nice. It enables an origin and distributed copies and forks, and all can flow to that origin. So it gives you a structured way I can work on my stuff and keep it consistent in my local version of things. And then at some point I will push my view of the world to the origin. It's literally called the origin. Push it upstream so that it can intermingle with other people's ideas, so that information can be placed in an accessible location on the same time base. My timestamps are preserved in the origin. So whatever work I'm doing along my own timeline of analysis and research and so on, when I add it to the origin, the pile, whenever I found things, they will align in real time in whatever the timeline has, whatever timeline has elapsed, with the research of others. So we'll find, oh yeah, we all found that same thing around the same time. Oh, you found this 10 days earlier. Where did that come from? So not so much for the sake of, I found this first, although that will happen, but also to align when certain other pieces of consequential information became available, right? So if this was published on a particular time and someone had a theory before, but somebody also had a notion based on this release after the release, you can correlate those things and say, oh, okay, this theory did bear out. So even if it was debunked, it could then be rebunked. So a lot of things that can start to become a little bit more clear if you know when notions are formed, and then you can interconnect, like, oh, because of these 12 things, I have reached this conclusion. Well, 10 of those things have now been debunked since you reached your conclusion, and we can see all this on a timeline, on a visualization of the timeline. Now, technically, there can be more than one origin. I mean, technically and really. But the technical implementation of multiple origins, multiple upstreams, and all that, because I'm talking about a Git manifestation of this notion, these things work, right? People can work on different parts of a software project, or can even have conflicts on, when they're working on the same part. And when they push it to the origin or to somewhere upstream, at some point these things will merge together, and at some point some tool or a person will say, hey, these conflict, you got to deal with this. You called it a A and they called it a B. You're going to have to figure out which one is the right one. So we can assume that any particular incident can organize around a single investigative origin if we want. We can think of it as a single origin, even though there may be multiple origins, and they can peer with each other, they can mirror each other, they can be adversaries even. But still, the use of shared information would be infinitely more valuable than the time spent without it. Time of the spectators as well. As the origin is kept updated, anyone what did I write here? Anyone with a desire or a need to gain some insight as to where the masses are leaning, start at the origin, not at one particular YouTube video or blogger or wherever else. You may get some, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool. I'm the first one to hear this from so-and-so. But if you then look at the bolus of data that has been accumulated, the bolus of knowledge, analysis, and implication, and so on, inference, you may think, you know what, this doesn't really make sense. Or you can wait until they push it up there. Maybe you're a witness. Maybe you co-sign their their piece of data that they're going to add to the mix. And then when they push it up there, your name is tagged on there. Oh yeah, the person that found it and the witness, and they say that the answer was B. At the very least, peer between origins, so they can help each other, so that they can synchronize data in the future. You don't have to be peers moment to moment, but every week, every month or something, you synchronize data. That gets beyond simple text. In practice with software, you don't want to fall that far behind, but this would not be merely textual documents. There would be some actual data, usually something along the lines of timestamps, latitudes, longitudes, and latitudes, specific, unique identification of individuals, events that can be described explicitly. There could be prose. There could be, this guy was here and then he ran down the street and so on. But you can indicate specific labels on that data with specific metadata, location and time and so on. So some of these things would be interesting, and if you did fall behind, you'd be able to correlate them. This is the part of the story that is not snapping of the fingers and implementing it with Git or GitHub or something similar, but it's an approach that could be done. I mean, to make it usable for the masses. Something like this probably already exists. In fact, I'm going to guarantee that tools like QGIS and similar, so any geographic information system, allows for placement of things with such metadata attached to it and so on. I'm barely scratching that surface as well, but this can work. People in the software world are already doing something similar to this, but so we would just have to be a little bit more careful about how, the why, the user interface to enable easier addition of data and so on. Even if someone or something, a book author, a newspaper company, for examples, wants to retain exclusivity for the purposes of their publications or their activities, presentations, and whatnot, an eventually consistent update at the origin is still possible. Eventual consistency is a real thing. It happens in databases all the time. With timestamps at the time of local capture included in the upstream origin, as I've already kind of suggested this. In other words, if I add some facet of my investigation to my repository for my book, and then I'm able to add my information to the origin upstream, I don't necessarily have to add my book, but I can add some of my findings that would be relevant to the upstream data bolus. My timestamps will be preserved. We can even talk about signing off and witnesses and so on, because these are also solved problems. You can even throw in the blockchain if you really want to. And why would you not want to? YouTube and Wikipedia are nice. They are useful, but there are better tools that can be deployed per incident to maintain a degree of independence and sustainability. And yes, the origin can be mirrored and archived if this notion were to be adopted. And again, it doesn't have to be Git. I'm just using that as an example of something that is actually deployed and working at scale. We already do that with the software you are using right now, all the things I've just described. So the thing is, if you're going to have open analysis out in the world, there is absolutely value to be found in people publishing their findings. If they're not working on something confidential, an active investigation, and you're a party to the prosecution, to the Department of Justice, we can leave that there for now. But if you are able to publish your findings, you can, or you should be allowed to do that, obviously, but you should also be encouraged to participate in some sort of a data sharing scheme, which I've alluded to here. The finer points, obviously, not to be solved today, but you should participate in a data sharing scheme so that not only do you save your time and make the most of the time you're putting into it and your analytical prowess and so on, but you are a part of a moving machine that is actually moving, whether you're part of it explicitly or implicitly, right? So if you're working on some research of an incident, if you are all over the inciting incident, you were really there, or you're taking this up minutes or years later. Some people become JFK assassination aficionados much later, long after the fact. Then you can conduct an interview when you're in prison. Hey, that's you, James Files. It's just based on everything you read, whether he was there or not. So there are people that are going to come, they're going to enter and leave and then maybe re-enter the timeline of investigation about the timeline of the event itself and what happened before and since. an ability to capture that information, not by recommitting yourself to investigating, to spelunking through caves of interconnected chaos, but oh, okay, let's see where we are in this research project. Here is a timeline with a consistent time base. We know when certain people were finding certain pieces of information, and the information has itself a time and a location, and which actors and which actions were taken, and the impact, and what led to the next thing. Here's a connected set of events, a chain of events with explicit relations by person or by location or implication. Right? Somebody gave someone else a password. Okay, and then that password later was used to infiltrate a computer system to disable some alarms, and then that was used some other, later, and so on. So if you can build up this chain of relations to assemble the narrative of the timeline, that could be useful. To have people redoing that time and time again, it seems like we're leaving a lot on the table as far as productivity and efficiency. So the whole notion here is to take the notion of open analysis, of allowing, and not only allowing, but encouraging people in the world to ask questions and to put in some effort if they want to find some answers, to be able to compare those answers in a peer setting, peer review, if you like, to figure out, oh, okay, I'm barking up the wrong tree, or this might be worthwhile. There are tools and methods already available, already in use, that I think are leaving people with earnest, the best of intentions, and the time and energy to spend on those best of intentions. They're leaving them to their own devices, and I think they're wasting a lot of what could be useful energy, but certainly goodwill. Hey, I'm gonna spend all this time and I'm gonna put it out there so other people can benefit from it or learn from it, and maybe I'll monetize it on my whatever channel on whatever platform. And then somebody comes along and says, "Oh, that was debunked 2 weeks ago or 2 years ago." So I think there's a lot left on the table, and I think this is an interesting thing in general, and it can apply to news reporting. It can apply to anything where there are multiple inputs. And we talked about this before, conspiracy, and there was another episode. So this is just a specific reflection on what's happening right now with regard to the Charlie Kirk series of events, the incident in Utah, and the various citizen journalists, investigators, and analysts, and so on that are spending their time and drawing the spectator time of others like myself, when a lot of this could be made much more analyzable if it were published, if data were made in a consistent structure. I know I'm kind of getting outside the realm of likelihood here, but if people would follow some best practices, then we could actually say, oh, time A, time B, time C, here's what happened, here's how they fit together. What you're saying doesn't make sense. What you're saying makes a bad assumption that someone else had more data about. With the Charlie Kirk situation, for example, was he wearing a necklace, body armor, a earpiece, a microphone cable under his shirt, whatever it was, right? What caused the shirt to do that when this happened? There's a lot of opinions. There could be one common place to hash that out and to make the different facets of possibility, right? Was it a chain for a necklace of some sort of jewelry? Was it a cable or a cord for his audio system? Was it an earpiece tube? I think those are almost like a stethoscope, I think, right? They're clear plastic. There's a lot of different inputs. What was there video from behind? Was it so the ability to share those resources and analysis, not necessarily the conversation. People can speak like normal humans, but to distill findings into something that can be shared and validated, connected in a relationship graph with times and whatnot. I cannot imagine how much more valuable conspiracy theories would be at that point. So anyway, that's where I'm going to leave it. My time says 1 hour, 9 minutes, and 45 seconds mark. So I'm going to go ahead and when I hit stop, I usually I normalize the audio. So hopefully it sounds okay, not too loud, not too quiet on your side. There will be passages that are quiet, but in general, it tries to normalize the audio to a consistent setting so you won't get the very loud setting. And then truncate silence. I reduce noise. Hopefully it sounds clear, not too much hissing and whatnot. Truncate silence and ship it out. So I'm going to guess it's going to be something like 1 hour and 5 minutes. I got 1 hour and 10 minutes. There's a 10-second leader for noise reduction sampling. So I just have it on with the noise floor making its noise. So I reduce the hiss that way. And then, so loudness normalize, noise reduction sample, noise reduction for the entire episode, truncate silence, export to MP3. Bam. That's where I'm going to leave it for today. Obviously, my voice has not enjoyed this. I got to figure this out. I keep talking about this because it's really, 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 really bothering me. There's a conspiracy, I tell you. Have a good weekend. Whenever you're listening to this, there's a weekend coming.